All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Man on Second podcast. Took a little bit of a break for myself here over the last few weeks, but I am back and better than ever here for 2022. As always, I'm joined by Joe Frisaro, and we have a very special guest today, Kevin Czerwinski. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you did.
Beautiful. All right, Joe, so break it down for us. Who is our guest today?
Yeah, but before we get to Kevin, I'm going to just kind of remind, we got our we teaming up with Dugout Mugs. I hope Kevin's a fan. Dugout Mugs are awesome. Great gifts for the holidays. I'm sure a lot of people loaded up on those. They got the wood bats. I like the aluminum. I just got my Rays one, got Marlins one on the way. But dugoutmugs.com/man-on-2nd if you want to order these great mugs. Again, dugoutmugs.com/man-on-2nd. Eric will probably get that up there in a little bit as well. But yeah, this is a real pleasure to introduce Kevin Czerwinski. Kevin and I started, when I started at MLB.com back in 2002. Kevin was on the Mets in those early years when I was there. And Kevin is he's doing a blog called The Bobble List. And if you noticed, we're branching out today. We're being a little different. My desk is just littered with about 15, 20 or so bobbleheads. And I took this opportunity as the lockout's going on. And, I kind of reflected, why are we fans of these sports and baseball in particular? And a big reason is these collectibles and bobbleheads are fun. Man on Second podcast is going to be inclusive on a lot of stuff. Kevin does a blog called The Bobble List, and I'm going to let Kevin kind of catch us up to date what he's doing. He's doing stuff for Ball 9 as well. We will, during this podcast, talk a little bit of lockout, playoff talks and the Mets and the Marlins later in the pod, but we're going to go heavy on bobbleheads right now. I'm happy to introduce Kevin Czerwinski. Kevin, kind of catch people up to date and how they can find you as well.
Hi, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate you guys inviting me. Always a pleasure to deal with Joe. Joe was one of the good guys on the beat back in the day. It was always fun to head down to Miami or have the Marlins come into town because you get to spend some time with Joe, which is always nice. Well, my blog is The Bobble List, and it pretty much centers about what it is, all around bobbleheads. I write about people who collect. I do a little marketing work for Forever Collectibles in that they put out new bobbleheads almost every day of the week now, and I will introduce their new products and try to push some traffic towards their site. I work with the Bobblehead Hall of Fame. I've done stuff with Royal Bobbles. Warren Royal, the owner of Royal Bobbles, is fantastic. Almost all of his stuff is non-sports related, but the quality of his product is second to none. I have some of those I can show you in a little while if you're interested. And I've done some stuff with a few other bobblehead companies, Bobbles Galore, all these places, and some individual artists who make them. You talked earlier about, before we got on here, Joe, you were talking about the pandemic and cleaning out and all your baseball cards and everything. The bobblehead world is big as it is, but when the pandemic hit and everybody was stuck home in front of their laptop every day, boy, did it take off. People were buying and selling and trading and moving stuff, and it really exploded. And people are so interested in this stuff. Last year, 2 years ago, when nobody was at the ballpark, just the players, and there were no giveaways, no SGAs, people couldn't get there. People were going nuts because there was nothing for them to collect. They couldn't go to minor league games and get stuff. They couldn't go to major league games and get stuff. And it really freaked a lot of people out. And this past year, once everybody got back into it and back in the ballpark, it really took off again. And you'd be surprised at the amount of money spent in this particular hobby and the time and the effort and the collections that some people have. I've written about so many people who have thousands upon thousands of these things. There's a guy in St. Louis who I wrote about who has 16,000 of them. He had to buy a new house just to fit all his bobbleheads.
Kevin, if I interrupt, I mean, I have kind of a modest collection over 100, and I'm proud of that. And it kind of started, obviously on the beat, back in '02 when I started. You go to wherever, Shea Stadium or whatnot, and in Marlins Park or the old ballpark at the time, they'd have the giveaways. And so I basically got them and gave it to my son, and then next thing you know, he would order some. And next thing you know, we got, a ton of them. And just like I said, they're on my desk here. And just some, I'm going to relay a really quick bobblehead story on this particular bobblehead here of Josh Beckett. And it was back in 2002, my first year on the beat, the Marlins. And that's the year it was Beckett's rookie year. They had Brad Penny at the time, AJ Burnett, and they had Ryan Dempster. Those were 4 anchors of their rotation, or they thought going into the season. This is kind of a quick, funny story where, of course, that season they traded Dempster at the trade deadline. Well, they had this marketing campaign where they're going to get those 4 guys and bobbleheads for all of them, but they kind of delayed it. They ended up trading Dempster. They actually acquired Julian Tavares. And actually, if memory serves, Ryan Clement was, or Matt Clement, whatever. I might be confused with the quarterback. The guy who pitched for the Cubs for a little bit. Just correct me, I'm drawing a blank. But they traded him right before the season and got Julian Tavares. So they kind of delayed because Clement was part of their group of guys that they had the bobblehead giveaways. Well, they end up, ushering in a Julian Tavares bobblehead. It was right around, like July, August, or whatnot. They decided they're going to roll these bobbleheads out on like every weekend to the rest of the year. They bring the guys in. They bring Beckett. They bring Brad Penny. They bring AJ Burnett, and they bring Julian Tavares. They bring them into this to the interview room with the media, and they have them sit behind their bobblehead. And there's this like awkward silence, as no one really knows what to do. Guys like Beckett, they're just tapping the top of their bobblehead, they're bobbing. No one got the ball rolling. So, they basically say, does anyone have anything to say? And everyone was silent. And Julian Tavares goes, yeah, I have something to say. And then, everyone, the heads you could see looking down the row from the players themselves, he goes, and in all seriousness, it cracked me up. He goes, who am I to have a bobblehead? Julian Tavares just he basically couldn't have been if he got inducted into the Hall of Fame, he couldn't have given a more emotional speech of just how gracious he was to have a bobblehead made of him. And I was looking, I was like, is this a joke or is he serious? But you could see he was dead serious, and that really just broke the ice. And then all the players just talked about how cool it was, because they were like, Beckett was like 21, 22 at the time, Penny a year or two older. They didn't really know what to expect or whatever. They just had a bobblehead. But it was just kind of a funny story how Julian Tavares really took hold, and he was really moved to have a bobblehead because in his eyes, he made it when he got a bobblehead.
Well, you know what? There are a lot of players who feel that way. A lot of players don't care, but there are more than a handful who really get into it. Forever Collectibles signs players on as ambassadors, and they'll make a bobblehead of player X or player Y. I just posted this morning, they made a bobblehead of Darren Waller of the Raiders because he's now an ambassador for FOCO. So, some of the players really get into it. Many of them, at this point in their careers or their lives, with the money that they're making, they really could care less. It's really not that big of a deal, but some of them are very into it. And if you take your time and you really work the hobby, you can get some really good bobbleheads early on, cheap, at cost, free if you go to the ballpark, and the valuation of them goes through the roof. You talk about player bobbleheads and guys who wanted them. Years ago, when Steve Traxel was pitching for the Mets, and he wanted a bobblehead. He saw everybody else on the team, John Franco and Art Howe and all these other people getting bobbleheads. He didn't get one. So he kind of made it known that he wanted a bobblehead. So they made a bobblehead of him, but they only gave it out on days that he pitched and to fans in specific rows at Shea Stadium. So it would, if he made 25 starts at home or 20 starts at home that year, and 600 people or 500 people, maybe even less, 400 people got them, it was something cool. And those are now some of the most valuable red bobbleheads out there because nobody has them. The Traxel bobblehead on the secondary market's going for as much as $300-400 because nobody has them. So if you get lucky or you know what you're doing, you can really get in on the ground floor of some stuff. Most of the stadium giveaways now, they give away so many of them, it's tough to kind of say that it's exclusive or limited or whatever. If something's been given out in the last 5 years and they made 55,000 of them, it's really not limited and it's really not vintage. So if you want to go back years ago when bobbleheads first really took hold back in the 60s, the older ones are really cool and really expensive. One of the most expensive, if not the most expensive one that you can get on a commercial market now, the Roberto Clemente that they did in '62. It's selling for, depending upon its condition, could be anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000. There's a guy down your way, down in Florida, a guy by the name of John Bray, who runs the Nodder Exchange. He does an auction every month for vintage Nodders or bobbleheads. And he sold one last year. It was a San Francisco 49er prototype from 1964. Went for over $20,000. So people are really into this. And if you go back to the ones in the 60s, getting the ones in the 60s that are in good condition are really tough. But if you can find one in good condition, or you find somebody that doesn't know what they have and you can get it, go ahead and get it. Because I got to tell you, it's from an investment standpoint, it really pays off. I used to, when I was on the beat with you and I first started collecting, this was 20 years ago, I would just buy everything because it's like, oh my God, I'm a bobblehead collector. I got to buy everything. And then you realize that a lot of these, they're just mass produced and they're not worth anything. So you kind of pare down, you shape your collection. And, I've got probably about 500 of them now. And I do mostly Mets, but there's an artist I like up in Canada. His name is Matt Hirsch. They call him the Cat Man. This is probably my most valuable bobblehead. This is a Cat Man, Mickey Mantle, from when he won, depicting him winning the Triple Crown. Now, this is made out of ceramic, and Matt does a great job. Matt has a kiln in his garage. He makes all his own molds, hand paints all of them. He only does a handful of each one. I bought that one back in 2000, not knowing what it was. I got it on eBay, paid $20 for it. It's now worth about $1,500. So yeah. I have probably 8 or 9 Catmen now that I've either purchased or he's made for me because I've written a lot about him. He does some really good stuff. He lives up in Vancouver. It's just fantastic work. He really does a great job. The bobblehead companies too, Forever Collectibles is really nice. They get a lot of stuff out there, all sports. And it's gotten to a point where you have to really work at it. It's become almost a business because there are some things that you can get, they're not worth anything. They may be worth something to you. I mean, if you're a fan of the Marlins and you want to collect all the Marlins bobbleheads, that's fantastic. But, is there really going to be a market for some of the stuff? Probably not. Same thing with the Mets. I have a ton of Met bobbleheads. I have, almost 200 Mets bobbleheads, and probably 60% of them aren't worth a whole lot. But they're the Mets stuff, and I like collecting them, so I get them. Some of the other stuff, the rarer stuff, a couple $100 these things go for. And a lot of teams will put out bobbleheads, like a bobblehead of the month. The Astros are doing it now. The Cardinals have done it. The Phillies have done it. The Dodgers do it, all through Forever Collectibles. And those are really limited, and they're a little bit bigger, and they go through the roof in price. I have a bunch of Mr. Met of the Months from when they put those out in 2015 and 16. And they're probably 15 or 17 in the set, or the set over the course of 2 years. And I have a dozen of them. Trying to find the rest of them is crazy, and trying to find something that's at a not crazy price, good luck, because most of those are going for a couple $100 too. And if you really are into it and you really have the room, you can get a 3-footer. There are a ton of 3-foot bobbleheads made.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I don't have any 3-footers because I don't have the room. Can't afford them. But there are a bunch of Mr. Mets out there on the market now, 3-footers that sell them between $50 and $100 and $3,500.
Yeah.
So it's not a cheap hobby, particularly lately with shipping and everything trying to come over from China. But you'll notice, and I'm sure you saw this when you went to the ballpark when you were still covering, that if there's a bobblehead day or a giveaway or something that looks like it's going to be worth something, the line to get into the building is out.
Yes.
Wrapped around the building. City Field on a bobblehead day, on a giveaway day, forget about it. The line, they get there 4 hours early. They want to be the first one online. You have people there trying to collect as many of these things as they can, selling them in the stadium after they get them, offering some kid $10 for his bobblehead and then turn around and selling it to somebody else for 50 or 60.
Yeah.
So it's a big business.
Yeah.
So Joe kind of talked about how he got into it, about 20 years back when he started on the beat with the Marlins in 2002. And we've all kind of got our ubiquitous, it's a giveaway day. I remember when I was a kid going to Marlins games on giveaway days, and I see Joe's got that Pudge Rodriguez bobblehead. I know I have that one hanging around somewhere. How did you get your start? Because I know you mentioned you started around about 2000. How did you get your start into the collection aspect?
You know what? This goes again. Surprisingly, goes back to Steve Traxel. Steve's first year with the Mets was 2001, and that was my first year on the beat. And he got off to a bad start. So he had a real terrible April. And at that point, he and Bobby Valentine were not getting along all that well. And, Bobby and Steve Phillips decided, send him down to Buffalo for a couple of games, let him get himself worked out, and then we'll bring him back. Well, he was scheduled to make his first start in Buffalo on an off day for the Mets. So I talked my boss at the time into sending me up to Buffalo to go watch his start and writing about it. And I figured, look, I'm new on the beat. This will get me an in with him. I'll be the only guy up there. Turns out the game gets rained out. And I got to spend, 45 minutes, an hour with him in the clubhouse anyway, talking to him about everything, which was great. But before the game, I'm walking around the stadium up in Buffalo, and they had a Buster Bison bobblehead in the gift shop. And I saw it. I said, man, this is cool. I got to get this. I picked that up, and that was the first one, and I kind of haven't stopped since.
Yeah, Kevin, do you have these? It's always funny. You go on a road trip, and let's say we're in Milwaukee, and they have a bobblehead and giveaway, and the guys you're on the beat with, they are like, I don't have room in my suitcase to bring this home. Joe, you want another one to give it to your kid? I mean, I got a ton of them that way. Back when my boy was really young, it was like, yeah, because I kind of would make room. Sometimes you could squeeze two if you're doing a 6-game road trip and in 2 cities, you might hit 2 bobbleheads. Next thing you know, I'm coming home from Shea Stadium with a bobblehead, and from Citizens Bank in Philly with a Phillies bobblehead. It might even be like the Fanatic, which is always popular with the kids as well. And before you know it, they add up. You do that for 18 years like I did. Those things add up just doing that. And then, if you do other sports, I remember doing some freelance work doing the Panthers when Pavel Bure was there. Got a Pavel Bure bobblehead and so forth. So it's a fascinating hobby and a lot of fun. And just a few like here, I don't even remember getting this one. This is the Al Leiter with the on the 97 type team, back in the old days. And my boy got this Ty Cobb one. He grabbed that somewhere.
Well, the Ty Cobb stuff is very collectible and sells for a lot, Joe.
Okay, well, we'll keep that in a good spot. This Dansby Swanson one is interesting because Kevin, he's sliding. It's like he's in air. He's sliding. He's not just your typical hitting bobblehead. I don't want to knock them all over, so I'm going to put him over here. But yeah, it's the fun ones. Yeah,
you can get a lot like that. The Mets and the Brooklyn Cyclones did a whole bunch of Seinfeld ones. So they have one of the Soup Nazi. They have one of George eating shrimp. They have obviously Jerry. They have Keith Hernandez. A whole bunch of them from Seinfeld. They have one that's just the Festivus pole and George's father. And these things, some of these things are crazy. They're selling for $400 or $500 on the secondary market.
That's just so funny.
You talk about getting them. When I was still working with you over at BAM, and I go to the winter meetings every year, I'd go over to the trade show in the hotel adjacent to the meetings. And you'd go over there on a Sunday night when they're cleaning up and they're getting ready to get out of there. And they're just giving everything away. I must have come out of there with probably 100 bobbleheads over the time I was at BAM, because these guys don't want to pack them up and get rid of them. And a lot of them are just prototypes. I actually have one that I picked up from there is one of Ferguson Jenkins autographed. I got another one of Tom Seaver in his Fresno uniform pitching for Fresno. Yeah. So, it's the kind of hobby where, unfortunately, if you have a lot of them like I do, the boxes take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
And some people don't like buying them or trading for them if they don't have the boxes, which is tough. I've thrown a lot of boxes out because a lot of them I'm not getting rid of. And I've gotten to a point where my younger son collects these things now too, and he's probably got 100 of them in his collection. And he's purchased a bunch from this guy, a bunch from Matt. He has a whole bunch of Chief Wahoos that Matt made, and he bought them for $100 a quarter each, $150, and now they're selling for the secondary market between $700 and $1,000 each. So it's a great investment, and he's funny about it. I'll buy a bobblehead, or I'll get a new bobblehead, or I'll get one. I say, "You want me to get you one?" And his response is usually, "Nah, don't worry about it. I'll get it when you die."
Well, I hope that's a while for you.
Yeah.
Hey, Kevin, let me ask you. Over here in the corner, you might see the Hank Aaron, and I got that at Turner Field back in the day. What would Hank, and then a Tony Perez one? Hall of Famers, obviously iconic. What do you think those could go for?
Hall of Famers go for a little bit more, depending upon who they are, and depending upon the team. The Dodger bobblehead fan base is rabid. They will spend pretty much anything and collect anything. The Braves have a really good fan base too. The Braves put out good bobbleheads too. So the Aaron ones that they put out have been great. The Brewers put out a lot of Aaron ones as well. Yeah. That particular Aaron you have, you could probably get $50 or $60 for it, maybe 70, depending upon who you're selling it to.
Okay. Yeah.
Are there any discrepancies in terms of, for example, with baseball cards? I know if you get a rookie card or something before a guy is who they are. Are there distinctions like that with bobbleheads where there will be a bobblehead made of a guy really early in his career and then he goes on to be really good, and that kind of raises the value?
Yeah, to a degree, especially if you get one, say you get a giveaway at the ballpark and it's just an average ball player. And people don't hold on to him because it's just an average ball player. Say, it's James McCann, who's just an average ball player. And James McCann goes on to have this Hall of Fame career. Most of the people who had the James McCann originally are like, I don't need this. This guy's nobody, and they get rid of it.
Right.
If it becomes harder to find, sure, they can really go up in price, and depending upon the production run. If you go into a ballpark though and you're getting 55,000 of them made,
right,
not so much. That's why the FOCO ones are kind of collectible now, because they only make 200 or 300 of them. And if you don't get it immediately when they come out, if you don't stay on top of it, you don't get one. If FOCO's selling it for $60, you could turn around and put it on eBay, a week later for 200. There was there's a fan group up here in New York with the Mets called the 7 Line Army, and it's named.
They make their way down here every now and then.
Yeah, it's named after the subway line that goes into Citi Field, and they put out their own bobbleheads from time to time, and their Mr. Met and Mrs. Met bobbleheads from a couple of years ago are selling for over $400 or $500 now. They had two that they put out this past year. They put out a Daniel Murphy holding up the 7-line flag after the Mets won the pennant in 2015, and it was like $60. And they have a Mr. Met in a golf cart coming in from the bullpen for another $50 or $60. The Daniel Murphy one, which was finally delivered last month, is now selling for $200-$300 on the secondary market, because they only made so many of them and not everybody got them. So it's also a matter of right place and right time. It's like this Mickey Mantle I got. It was a right place at right time thing. You know, you can look at it. There are a bunch of old Negro League sets that are really valuable, that can sell for anywhere between $500 and $1,200 for the set. I have a set that Gartland put out a couple of years ago called the Cooperstown Collection, and that as a complete set sells for about $1,400. You know, there are 8 or 9 in that set. So, you know, if you look at it as more of an investment, you can do all right. If you look at it as a collector and as a fan, too, you can do all right as well. There are so many people that I've written about, though, who just have so many of these things. Guys who have thousands upon thousands of them. There's a guy who I wrote about down in Philadelphia who has almost 10,000 of these things, and he has every World Series bobblehead that Foco ever put out. Back 2002.
That's unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, talk about a sentimental thing. Excuse me, real fast. It's like I said, you know, we're doing a little post holidays, getting the garage all straightened up. This Louis Castillo bobblehead now has a lot of sentimental value to me because it was just sitting in a bin since like 2005. You know, that we didn't even touch that thing. I dusted him off to get him out. Now, you know, at least sentimentally, that's something I'd have a hard time getting rid of right now, whether it's worth anything or not, just for the fact that it withstood, you know, 16 years in the garage without even knowing it was there.
Well, but that's, you know what, I agree with you, and that's a lot towards collecting. I mean, the guys who collect baseball cards are players who aren't any good, but they're their favorite player, so they're not going to get rid of those. I have bobbleheads that I have. I have a bobblehead of Larry Holmes that I've had a bunch of people offer me money for, and I got it with my best friend. I'm not going to get rid of it. It has sentimental value. The Buster Bison I got, I'm not going to get rid of that. It had sentimental value. It's the first one I got. So, you know, there are ones. I have a Catman Keith Hernandez that I have that I won't get rid of. It's just stuff like that you're right. There is a sentimental value there, and again, whatever it is you have, regardless of whether it's a card or a bobblehead or a bat or a baseball, it's only worth as much as somebody's willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
You know, if you find somebody who really wants that Louis Castillo and is willing to drop $300 on it,
yeah, maybe then.
and it's only worth $5 or $10 now. You know, you never know. There are people out there who will do that. They'll spend the kind of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, is there on this subject? You know, we know the Honest Wagner baseball card of 1906 or whatever it was, the Honest Wagner card. Is there a bobblehead version of that? Is there a, you know, top of the line bobblehead? Let's stick with baseball, for instance.
Baseball, top of the line, highly sought after collectibles. All the ones in that first run from the 60s, the Roger Maris, the Mickey Mantle, the Roberto Clemente, Willie Mays had 2 versions made. All the team ones, you know, those are really super collectible, and they are very hard to find in really good condition. There was going back to the guy who runs the auction site. Back then, they made all these team. Let me see if I got one I can show you.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff, and I'm glad we got Kevin to kind of break it down.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
These are both Mets from the 60s.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And these are later 60s versions. The earlier 1960s versions of the teams that have these little boys, if you get them in good condition, several $100s. The Houston Colt 45s put out put out 2 of them in 1963. A white kid and a black kid. Now, putting out the black players in the early 60s like that was pretty rare, particularly because of the time and the social issues that were going on. And there weren't a lot made, and there aren't a lot that survive in good condition. A Houston Colt 45 kid, a black kid like that, sold for over $12,000 last year.
Wow.
Because you can't find them.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff is tough to find. A lot of the early Foco stuff that comes out, you know, late 90s, early 2000s, those are really hard to find now too, because they only made a limited number of them. And honestly, people who bought them just kind of bought them and stuck them somewhere, keeping them as an investment. And it's tough. The Catman stuff too. Some of the Catman stuff he has out there, his early stuff from the late 90s and early 2000s, he did a bunch of Michael Jordan prototypes that can go for anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 a piece.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, it depends on what you're willing to pay, but the people who are collecting these things are willing to pay. They're willing to spend some money. I mean, I'm looking at an auction now that the guy in the Nodder Exchange is running that ends on Wednesday, and he had a Met kid like that from 1964 with a white base, and Mr. Met had orange. The Met kid had orange sleeves on, and it's tough to find the orange sleeve one. And right now the auction's up to $500. And I'm not dropping $500 on it, but I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. You can get these people who collect seriously, who really just, you know, this is their investment portfolio.
Yeah.
And if you get a lot of those older ones, I mean, my collection now, if I sold it as an entirety, I could probably get between 15 and 20 grand for it. But people that dwarf that, people who have, you know, hundreds of these,
yeah,
they could turn around and, you know, pay for the kids' college.
That's amazing. And the thing is, Kevin, you'll see, you know, the time flies. I mean, seems like yesterday when we were starting back in 2002 at BAM and collecting one or two, and before you know it, you got over 100 or 500. It does come pretty quickly. You know, you can build those collections up, you know, without even much effort in much more. So people, you know, Eric, you're young, you find stuff, you know, grab it. Before you know it, by the time you're 30, 40, you're going to have, you know, 400 or 500 of whatever.
And you know what? If you look at the quality of the bobbleheads that are being produced now, the change from, you know, late 90s, early 2000s, when they got really popular again and they started getting mass produced, to what they are now, much different. The Baseball Hall of Fame in conjunction with the Bobblehead Hall of Fame, in conjunction with the Negro Leagues Hall of Fame, it puts out regularly now Negro League stuff, and they had a Negro League set that they put out a few years ago. Let me show you one of these. These are the quality of these is just so good that, and the artwork and the detail that,
wow,
you know, they're actual little tiny works of art.
mm-hmm.
And if you're a baseball fan or a baseball historian and you love the Negro League stuff, there's so many great Negro Leagues bobbleheads out there now that are just awesome. That if you could find them, buy them, because they're worth a ton of money.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
You know, especially the older ones. You can get some old ones of like Turkey Stearns or Satchel Paige or somebody. That these things are a couple of $1,000s each.
Yeah, I wonder even what like a Satchel Paige Miami Marlins when he was in those independent leagues back in the 1940s, you know, and 50s. I wonder what those would be going
you know,
for.
Well, I got to tell you, and I'm going to pull out another one for you.
We're getting a good view of your house there, Kevin. That's the one thing good.
I had the Catman made me a Satchel Paige when he was with the Browns.
Okay.
And one of the things that I really like about this one in particular is that he really did a great job of doing Brownie on the sleeve and Brownie on the base.
Mm.
And if you could get him, he's only making 4 of those. He only made 4 of them in the set.
Oh, wow.
So right away, the price is already jumping up. Before I even get it, I know if I really wanted to, I could sell it for a ton more. Wow. Because there are only 4 of them out there. And in his case in particular, him being the Catman, if you reach out to him, he'll make you pretty much anything you want. And he's got enough of a reputation and enough of a name in the industry that if he's doing it, it's going to be worth something.
Yeah. Wow, so that's amazing. They take the ideas. Hey, Kim, before we change topics, is there places in Florida or South Florida, auctions or things for our, pretty much our base is down here, that they could kind of keep an eye on for bobbleheads if they want to get interested?
Yeah, if you go to the Nodder Exchange, nodderexchange.com, the guy who runs it, his name is John Bray. He lives in Fort Lauderdale area.
Okay.
He takes old bobbleheads. He does everything on consignment. People who have family members who have died and they want to move the bobbleheads, that kind of thing. And he sells them, and he takes a percentage of what they sell for, and that's his business. But all of his stuff, he's got an auction that's ending this Wednesday. If you go to the Nodder Exchange now and you look at the auction, you'd be surprised at some of the stuff you see. And if you really want to get serious about collecting, that's a good way to get into it and get a real good sense of what some of the older stuff is worth. The more commercial stuff, if you go to foco.com and Forever Collectibles, that stuff. If you go to Royal Bobbles, let me show you a Royal Bobble real quick. The Royal Bobbles are all non-athletes, but they're pop culture and historical figures. And I mean, this is the Teddy Roosevelt. This thing is spectacular. I mean, the detail on it, down to the kerchief that he's wearing, is incredible.
Yeah.
And his stuff is pretty reasonably priced. It's 30 or $40 a pop, which is a little cheaper than Foco, but it's all good stuff. And if you can get some of his early ones that are now retired from Royal Bobbles that you can't get anymore, a couple $100. There's some that are just so crazy. He did a run on like John Wayne or Dwight Eisenhower, and you can't get them anymore. Wow. And they're nuts. And if you go to all these different places, you go to the Bobblehead Hall of Fame, they have a 7-foot bobblehead, life-size bobblehead of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that Alexander Global did.
Oh, wow.
So there's really a lot of good stuff out there.
That's awesome. Yeah, this is a great segment that we're letting it run a little longer. But you want to talk a little baseball now, Kevin?
Of course.
You're good. Yeah. Eric, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we're talking about in the CBA, and it kind of ties into some of the sporting events that we've seen this weekend, is the potential of an expanded playoffs. Personally, I'd be in favor of some sort of expansion to the MLB playoff system. However, I don't want it to turn into what we're seeing this weekend in the NFL with some of the blowouts that we've got over there. So it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of gets implemented. But how do you feel about potentially MLB expanding the playoffs again?
I would prefer they just left it the way it is. We saw what happened in the football this weekend. Teams like Pittsburgh didn't deserve to be in the playoffs. Philly didn't deserve to be in the playoffs. They're only there because they just happened to fall under the requisite. They had the right record, and why bother at that point? And teams in the playoffs, and it's also, I mean, maybe it's a little different with baseball. You can catch lightning in a bottle, especially in a wild card game. If your team is mediocre and you got Jacob deGrom pitching, maybe you catch lightning in a bottle. But more often than not, the teams that are supposed to be there at the end generally are there. And if it's just a money grab or just to keep people interested, there are other ways you can keep people interested too. Go back to playing ball the way they played the ball in the 60s and the 70s. Play real baseball. Shorten game times from 4 hours back down to 2 hours and 15 minutes. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think they're kind of caught right now, and I think we're talking about I think it'll either go to 12. I think 12 will probably happen. Go from 10 to 12. I think that'll probably happen, and I'm not really opposed to that. Whether they went up to 14, that's obviously with a 30-team league to go 14. We're going to see, if you got a bunch of 9 and 8 teams in the NFL playoffs, well, what do you expect when they're up against the 11 and 5 team at home and motivated? You're seeing that. The difference I see where the CBA is focusing on the anti-tanking. Well, it's going to create a more mediocre product. But if you want to keep teams more competitive, something has to give, because you can't really say you can't tank and then say, well, if you start trading your pending free agents or guys in July to make the good teams better for their run, well, you're going to lose more, and then they're going to penalize you by taking your draft slot away. I think baseball has complicated it more than just, if it's strictly the premise of going with a set number and let teams operate. But if there's going to be this push to not take it down to zero, and hey, as someone who I probably covered more losing seasons in the last 20 years than anybody, I'm way up there. But you saw the reason why. You could stay mediocre, or you're gonna be happy with 90 losses and rather have 85 losses and feel, well, if I lose 85, at least I could pick in the top 10 again.
Well, but you know what, Joe? If you look at it, tanking in baseball is really a calculated risk. If you tank in football and you get a great quarterback, or you get a top pick 2 or 3 years in a row, you could turn a team around really fast.
Yeah.
Baseball, you can't turn a team around fast. I mean, the guys that you're drafting, or these kids that they're signing now and the international signing, or 16, 17 years old, this is all long-term stuff. You get drafted in the first round of the MLB draft, you're not going to get there more often than not before 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So it's not as if you're tanking for right now. A lot of this is financial. Look, I live in New York. Look at what the Knicks were terrible for 20 years, and they're still not great. But they sold out every game. So James Dolan, the guy who owns them, he doesn't care if they win or lose. He's making money either way. If they win, it's a bonus. But every game's a sellout anyway, so what does it matter?
Yeah, I think the whole question of tanking only comes into play because I think everybody kind of looked at what the Astros did, 6-7 years ago, and that's kind of become the hot model because it worked. But realistically, that's kind of just because something works one time and it becomes kind of the in thing, doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to stay that way. Blueprints for winners change and shift, all the time.
And you know what? You're right. And you don't have to tank to have a good team. Tampa has a good team every year because they have smart baseball people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And rather than tanking, how's about you just go out and get some people who know what they're doing? Get a blend of old school people who know baseball and a couple of these other analytics kids who personally I don't like, and I'm not into that aspect of the game. But go out and get some old baseball people who can actually look at somebody and say, hey, this guy's good. I don't need you to tell me what his numbers are. I can look at him and tell you he's good.
Yeah.
Then you have something. But if you're just tanking to get draft picks, or you're just tanking to pad your bottom line, I mean, there are a lot of teams who are still collecting money, from the profit sharing stuff. The Yankees go over the limit. Guess what? Mets go over the limit. Guess what? Everybody gets money.
Yeah.
No,
I hear you. And as someone, look, I think the traditional scale it down tanking is pretty much on the outs. I don't think we're going to see that where, with the Marlins, with the $15 million. The thing is, when the Marlins in 2006 did it and they went to a $15 million payroll, they actually were pretty good. They had a Miguel Cabrera, they had a young Hanley Ramirez, they had Dontrell, they had some young pitching that was good, but that's very rare that you're going to be that. And this day and age with social media and players not being afraid to say what they think, it's going to be hard to get guys to buy in to when you go on the field, know you're going to lose 100 games, and then say, well, guess what? We're going to get incrementally better and so forth, and we'll all grow together. So I do like what the Marlins are doing right now is, yes, they got some kids. Their pitching is getting close to being ready to contend, so they're making more of the effort to go for it. And I think in a lot of teams, it'll come down to, if your pitching's ready to go, then you got to go for it, because you're nothing without that. And so,
no, listen, Joe, I agree with you, and I think that the Marlins right now are not going to be a bad team this year. I think they're going to be a good team, and I also felt before they had that last big sell-off that had they just added 1 or 2 pieces, they would have been a great team based on what they had.
Yeah.
But I mean, what you said about their pitching now, I mean, because they're in the Mets division, I see them a lot. They're they were a good team last year that looked like they were one or two pieces away from being at least a 500 team and making some noise. And listen, they made the playoffs the year before in that sketchy season, so it's they have something there.
Yeah,
if you build it the right way, it'll work. If you're doing it half-assed or willy-nilly, like teams like the Pirates are doing, that you never think they're going to get any better. What are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
And listen, just because you have money to spend doesn't mean it's going to work. The Yankees spent money all those years and didn't win anything.
Yeah.
The Mets spent money. The Dodgers spent a ton of money and only won once.
Yeah. And the Dodgers actually became I agree. I think it's as long as you have the depth to do it, and you're not really half your roster is guys have no business being there while the other half is ready to win. That's the tough thing when you're in that position, because you're only going to go so far. Your weaknesses are going to show eventually. There is no right wrong formula, but specifically to the playoffs, how do you think it would do in terms of interest, Kevin, if you had just to know that now it's 12 teams, a team that potentially, if they're floating 3, 4, 5 under 500 at the deadline, maybe they don't move a key player and they maybe even add a little bit and try to make that run. While if there isn't that extra playoff run, you might be forced to, in your opinion, to say, hey, look, the mountain's too high to climb. We might as well make the moves and trade right now.
Listen, from a fan standpoint, if it's the first week of September and you're a 500 team and you're still in the playoff hunt, from a fan standpoint, that's great.
Yeah.
From a baseball standpoint, or I guess a purist standpoint, or a old school kind of standpoint, once you get to the playoffs, if you're lucky enough to make it that far, you're going to get what you saw this weekend in the NFL. You're going to get a bunch of garbage.
Yeah.
So
mediocre is mediocre.
And you can't do. But listen, I think that baseball can do a lot of things to get that interest back. I mean, things like starting games at a reasonable time where they're not playoff games aren't ending at 12:30. Playing some afternoon games. I mean, when's the last time? I can't tell you the last time the Mets had a 1:00 game on a Saturday. Get rid of Sunday night baseball, please.
Yeah.
All this kind of stuff that'll bring the baseball went from being the national sport to being a regional sport, and the direction it's going, and it looks like it's going to be even less than a regional sport. They're horrible at marketing their players. You live on the East Coast. I live on the East Coast. How often do you see Mike Trout? How often do you know about Mike Trout? The guy's the best player in the game, and nobody knows about him.
And he's a Jersey guy.
Yeah.
Once he goes to an Eagle game, right?
Yeah.
He goes to the Eagles game, then it's a big deal.
And that's a problem. Whereas the NFL and the NBA market the heck out of their guys.
Yeah.
And, baseball is becoming a lot like the NHL in that regard. You don't have people baseball people know who they are. And real fans know who these guys are, but they're not marketable outside of the game.
Right.
You could talk to your wife or your mom, and she could tell you who some of these guys are in the NFL or the NBA because they're on TV all the time, or they're shoved down your throat. Baseball doesn't do that. Baseball doesn't shove it down your throat. I think they're at a point where that's what they need to do.
Yeah.
No, I 100% agree with the point of baseball and kind of marketing their stars, because baseball does have, a lot of guys that would otherwise be extremely marketable. But going back to potential playoff expansion, I know that there's a lot of people that would kind of, complain about watering down the playoff product, and that's true in some regards. But I think going from 10 to 12, I think, 12 out of 30 is a reasonable number. I agree with Joe. Getting the 14, I think, would be unacceptable. But when you go to the point, to Joe's point of, there's a little bit more teams in that kind of playoff hunt. And that's the whole thing, is September in and of itself. It feels like there's almost two postseasons. There's that run up into the postseason, and then you have the postseason. And I think that anything that'll make that September aspect of the game even more intriguing. I mean, we always have really good races that go down to the wire regardless. I think that helps. And then, you line them up, you play the game. I think, like you said, if a team has a really good ace and they're 85-77, they can beat the Dodgers. Absolutely.
And I think part of the problem with some of the September stuff, by that time the NFL's starting and they're playing 3 days a week in September. NFL's ratings went back up again this year.
Right.
And honestly, listen, the World Series game that was played on the Sunday night this past year, the NFL game started after the baseball game started and ended before the baseball game started, before the baseball game ended. I can watch an NFL game in less time than it takes me to watch a baseball game, especially a postseason baseball game. Why am I going to stay up till 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning to watch that? Especially if I'm not a fan of the team. If I'm just some guy living in North Carolina and I want to watch the World Series. They need to. They could do all they want about expanding the playoffs, but if they're not going to make the game more fan-friendly or take it back to where it was a little bit, I don't think it's going to matter much.
No, definitely. Especially as far as when it comes to, like you said, you can watch an entire NFL. That's wow. I hadn't even thought of that. That's pretty wild. That because I was watching an older game, every once in a while, MLB Network, they'll show one of those old-fashioned games, and I'll pull it up on YouTube, and it feels like, to an extent, and I know it's part of it is the 3 true outcomes: the walk, the home run, the strikeout. But man, I mean, it just feels like when the ball's in play, the game is just moving so much quicker.
Yeah, and that goes to all these stupid pitch counts. Guys back then weren't throwing 100 pitches in 4 innings. They don't train these guys or teach these guys now to go 8 or 9 innings anymore. And I know they're worried about their health and everything else. I am growing up in New York and watching the Met rotations of the early 70s with Seaver and Koosman and Matlack, and before he got traded, Ryan. Their whole philosophy was work more, throw more, you'll be better. And you look at those guys, and they all had great careers and were not physically hurt in any way other than normal wear and tear. I did a story a couple of months ago about Mickey Orlich, and talking to him, he said, God, I'd be the best pitcher in the world right now if I pitched now. I'd get $20 million to pitch 5 innings. He goes, Mickey Orlich from 1970 to 1974, in that 4-year stretch, threw almost 1,200 innings. Yeah. Only one other guy did that, and that was Wilbur Wood, and Wilbur Wood was a knuckleballer. These guys don't throw 300 innings. Nobody's ever going to throw 300 innings ever again. They have a tough time getting to 200.
Yeah, they had the 4-man rotations, obviously, and so their time came up. But it goes to with Jack McKeon, when he had Johnny Sain as his pitching coach many moons ago, and Jack always tells the Johnny Sain story where he said you got more injuries with inactivity than activity. So, because he was a guy, Johnny Sain believed in pitching and throwing. Like the guys would throw a lot, and now it's rest and build up, and like you say, they're looking to it's very frustrating to see a 4 2/3 innings pitched, and then you hear the rhetoric about what a great start that was. Struck out 8. Okay,
well,
gave up 3 runs in 4 2/3, and the bullpen's got to go pick up more than half the game.
Yeah, but see, you know what, Joe? That's another thing. Telling people that, wow, I struck out 8 in 4 innings. That's great. Today, that's not an accomplishment. You or I could probably go out there and strike out 8 in 4 innings the way that these guys just swing at anything, and they don't make contact. Yeah. The strikeout has become so devalued, like the home runs become so devalued. Yeah. It's crazy to watch some of it. Do you think a guy like Tony Gwynn would make it today? Do you think somebody would give him enough time to become Tony Gwynn?
Yeah. Hey, let's segue over in our last, and as we wrap this up, Kevin. The Mets, the offseason moves obviously made a lot of noise before the lockout. Kind of your thoughts on Scherzer and the Marte signing and so forth.
I love Scherzer. largely because it's not my money, so it's great. And I have never been a fan of people who complain about spending the money. It's not your money. You're a fan. Go out and enjoy it. Also, the guy who's spending the money now has more money than God. It's a drop in the bucket to him. So that's one thing. The top of their rotation, I love signing Scherzer, but if DeGrom's not healthy, that's still going to be a tough sell just having Scherzer there. DeGrom's got to be able to pitch an entire season, and he's got to be able to throw 6 or 7 innings a game. He can't be a 5-inning pitcher who pitches once every 2 weeks or once every 2 months.
Yeah.
And
then he's not going to make it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you need that. The back end of the rotation is still a little iffy. They need some work done there. I'm not sold entirely on their bullpen. I'm not sold on their closer at all. Their closer is trouble waiting to happen. I think they need a catcher. They have 2 backup catchers on their roster. They don't have a third baseman. I don't know what they're going to do with Robinson Cano. At this point, again, it's not my money. I'd buy him out and send him packing because he's just taking up a roster spot. I like that they signed Marte. I think that gives them a real leadoff hitter. They haven't had a real leadoff hitter in a while.
Yeah.
And the other guy they signed from Oakland, the right field.
Canna.
I don't know if he's an everyday player either.
Yeah.
I think they need another big bat because I think they're still going to pitch around Alonso if they don't have another big bat. I would like to see them get maybe Chris Bryant, who's not a traditional big bat, but he makes contact and he drives and runs and he gets on base and
he plays the game. He plays the game. Yeah.
And he'll provide some
protection. So you think Escobar goes to second then?
Probably.
Yeah.
And right now, who's their opening day third baseman? Jeff McNeil?
McNeil, I guess. Yeah.
J.D. Davis?
Yeah.
J.D. Davis can't field.
Yeah.
And he's a DH. And Dom Smith was a huge disappointment last year too.
Yeah.
So, they did great work. I'm not making this sound like sour grapes. They're a much improved team. They're a much better team right now than they were last year.
Yeah. I think this has been a really fun, and this hour went really fast. Normally we don't go this long, Kevin, but you've been so entertaining and informative. We just kind of let it roll. Really like the bobblehead segment. Again, Kevin, before we sign out, tell us once again how they could get in touch with you if they want interest in these bobbleheads and so forth.
Sure. You can reach me. You can look at my website, www.thebobblist.wordpress.com. Or you can email me. There's a link on the bottom of the Bobblist. You can find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook group called the Bobblist. Join that. I do all my bobblehead work in there. Everything that I write for Ball 9 goes in there. So easy to find. And guys, if you really need to, just talk to Joe. Joe will get you in touch with me.
Absolutely. Hey, Kevin, it was great catching up with you, buddy. It's been too long. We'll have you back on. Hopefully, this is a good experience for you as well. And, again, great catching up and really fun show to do with you.
Oh, I loved it, guys. It was really nice seeing you again, too, Joe.
Yeah. Okay,
it was a pleasure having you on. As always, everybody, you can follow us on Twitter at ManOnSecondBaseball. You can also find this podcast as well as all of our others on YouTube.com/5ReasonsSports afterwards. Thank you guys so much and have a wonderful day. It was a pleasure.